is a fantastic adaptation of a fantastic comic book, but while it's a relatively close adaptation, it's not without its differences. Some things needed to be changed legally, like the appearance of other Image heroes or even Spider-Man, who was replaced by Agent Spider. Some events happen in different orders to fit a TV show structure, and some storylines go ever so slightly differently, even improved with the benefit of hindsight. Some characters like Debbie, for instance, are given larger roles, and then at times races and genders are changed from time to time. We are now in season 4, and it's possible this season gives us the single worst and single best change from the comics. I was excited for this season. It's adapting a really great part of the comic, but in all honesty, the first episode was a bit boring. I thought that maybe this season would take a few episodes to ramp up, but no, episode 2 came in swinging. At this very moment, the Nolan and Alan story is easily the most interesting in the series. The two have a great chemistry, and whatever they're going through feels like the most important story in the series right now, because it is. I've read the comic, I know where things go, I know how important the Dinosaurus introduction is, or the Flaxen invasion is, but neither feel as important as this one. Regardless of its importance, this second episode was certainly the best of the 3-part premiere, and it's not even entirely because of that storyline. No, the best part comes right before. In the comics, Nolan explains the Scourge virus to Alan in a scene that lasts 4 pages and acts more so like a recap than a story arc in its own right, and it's here we get one of the series' best changes thus far. Lasting an entire third of this episode, we get to see the Viltrum Empire from a different perspective, maybe even a sympathetic one. We meet someone who looks suspiciously like Mark. Like the first moment this popped up, my first thought was that maybe this was one of the marks of another universe, one maybe where Nolan never left Viltrum. I don't know why they would focus on that now, after the Invincible War, but that's the first thing that popped up. But then again, he doesn't look exactly like Mark. Prime Video's cast listing immediately spoiled who this is: a young Nolan, a shocking but welcome surprise. I'm fairly certain we never saw Nolan like this in the comics, like this young and without a mustache. It's funny how close he looks to Mark, which makes sense because of how dominant Viltrum DNA is, but also using Nolan at this point in his life, where without the mustache he looks like a protagonist rather than a villain, the protagonist rather than the main villain, makes this sympathetic opening flashback work far better than it would have otherwise. We are quickly introduced to Viltrum's ruthless empire. One of them kills a worker for being exhausted, Nolan is extremely strict with the children, and then Nolan is ruthlessly savaged by his own parents. We never saw Nolan's mother in the comics, and his father is actually someone else. Spoilers for the comics, skip to this timestamp if you don't want to be spoiled, but essentially, Nolan's father in the comics is actually Argal himself, the great Viltrum emperor who was killed by the great betrayer, Thetis. This change is substantial for multiple reasons. The big thing is that it changes the future reveal that Nolan and therefore Mark are the heirs to the Viltrum Empire as the son and grandson of Emperor Argal. They can simply make it so that Nolan is Argal's grandson, however, instead of his son, which would keep intact the future storyline of the Graysons being the heirs to the Empire, while also allowing us these very personal moments between Nolan and his parents. These moments with Nolan and his parents are brutal. It showcases the insane brutality of the Viltrum Empire, paralleling the versus Omni-Man fight from season 1, but making it look like it was commonplace on this planet. It's crazy, but at this point I'm watching and just cannot believe this empire was ever even functional if they're always just killing each other and beating their own children to a bloody pulp. It's crazy because while watching this scene, I had a bit of sympathy for Nolan, but mostly just thought of how much the Viltrumites had this coming, and so then when they began falling to the Scourge virus, it felt relatively triumphant. They have this coming, they deserve this. However, something happened that I didn't expect. We watch from a young Nolan's perspective as the population simply collapses. Everyone dies. An unimaginable amount of people succumb to the virus and their society collapses. The world becomes sickly and green, life becomes a hellhole beyond conception, and watching it all go down is Nolan, who looks just like Mark. This all occurs in a scene void of dialogue with beautiful, cerebral, and depressing music that perfectly encapsulates the dire straits the Empire Empire found itself in. Then Nolan sees his father dead, the more compassionate and loving of the two parents, as loving as you're allowed to be on Viltrum, and he's forced to throw him into space. The scale of the billions of dead Viltrumites in space is an absolute sight to behold. This part isn't actually a change, it was in the comics, but the moment the camera zoomed out to reveal the Viltrumite ring around Viltrum was a genuinely insane moment. Then we cut back to the present and learn that Nolan told this story to Alan, and Alan's reply exemplifies why this scene works so well. It made me feel bad for the Viltrumites right after showing how self-destructive and brutal their culture is. They don't deserve sympathy, but the scene managed to accomplish that, and I think the main reason for that is because of the focus on Nolan in his youth looking like Mark, something that we never saw in the comics. Later on in the episode, Nolan learns that Thetis was responsible for the Scourge virus. In the comics, Nolan didn't really react to this, or at least if he did, it was entirely off-panel. Here, he attacks Thetis in an emotional outburst. Logically, given his current goals and his stance, he should be happy. Nolan does want the Viltrum Empire to be taken down, and the Scourge virus essentially did that. But emotionally, this reaction makes so much sense given what we saw in the opening flashback. Nolan experienced extreme horrors and extreme loss, moments we cut back to during this confrontation. The moment is intense and perfectly exemplifies Nolan's internal conflict regarding his people, none of which we saw in the comics, and none of which I don't think was even possible in the comics. And I love the comics, they're one of the best comic runs of all time, but sometimes the show is able to use the benefit of hindsight and the different format to expand and improve the groundwork that the comic laid, and well, this might not be the single best change of the series, but I think it's up there, and it's certainly the best of this new season so far. However, sometimes the changes are not always for the better. For instance, Amber in season 1 was a standout negative change that just about everybody hated, but now there might be another thing that's causing some controversy. As of this video, only episodes 1 to 3 have been released, so we haven't seen it yet, but it's been confirmed that Tech Jacket will be gender bent. In the comics, Tech Jacket isn't just an character, he's another Robert Kirkman creation who predates by just a few months in his own comic run, and then was later retconned into being in the same universe. Zach Thompson was a high school student who gains the extremely powerful alien armor known as the Tech Jacket from a dying Geldarian. Tech Jacket's comic did not last very long, but there were 2 more also very short volumes, and he was later brought into the universe during the War, and now during the Viltrum War that this season is adapting. Now, generally speaking, I'm not a fan of gender swaps. I think changing somebody's gender completely changes their character. I think occasionally it can work. A few examples that come to mind are Stormfront from The Boys, and even in itself, Shrinking Ray. I think it works for characters who literally no one cares about because, well, no one cares about them. There were no Shrinking Ray fans. They made him a woman and expanded her character far beyond the comics, and people like her more. As for Tech Jacket, however, he is a larger character than Shrinking Ray, literally. He has multiple, albeit short, comic runs, a supporting cast, and a large-ish role in parts of the comics. Tech Jacket has fans, and while I personally was never a huge fan myself, I can understand the frustration. If a niche character with a comic run I really like is gender bent in their one and only adaptation, yeah, it would piss me off. I've seen people say that the reason they're making this change is because the team that goes off to war in the comics is 100% male, and the point is to make it so there's like one female at least. And yeah, I kind of get it, but at the same time, I mean, this is a war, and war has always been 100% male. It's not inconceivable to expect even an entire army to be 100% male, let alone a small group like this. I'm honestly not actually mad about Tech Jacket. I don't think it'll negatively affect the series, but that's only because I'm not a Tech Jacket fan. I haven't read his comics. But anybody who has and is a fan of his, I get it. I understand why this would be annoying. Just to sprinkle in more review of this first 3 episodes of the season, the new intro is breaking apart to be space this time because the season will adapt the Viltrumite War, which is really cool. This intro is always really great. Like I said earlier, I thought episode 1 was a bit boring, some of the animation was stiff, and I don't love Dinosaurus's slight redesign. He's very simplified and a bit underwhelming design-wise. Design aside, he did have a good introduction and a decent fight. Mark seems very down and depressed, which does make sense, but also makes makes him the least entertaining character in these episodes, although this does show how he's becoming darker, which we could see at the end of the episode where he kills Russ, a brutal moment. Mark's talk with Eve's dad is changed, pretty drastically in fact. Eve's dad actually comes off a little better this time, and honestly, I think I prefer the original. Universa has always been a pretty boring villain, but her fight with Mark and Eve is pretty good. Episode 1 is an okay start to the season, but certainly not a great one. Honestly, up until now, only season 1 had a great first episode. I'd give this one a 7 out of 10. Episode 2 I pretty much already broke down, but I didn't mention everything. After the dark and depressing opening and before the intense moment between Nolan and Thetis, everything in between is a super fun adventure. Nolan and Alan have just incredible chemistry, the pillow joke was perfectly adapted and is hilarious. I completely forgot about the Star Trek parody crew, but they are also very funny. There's some great action scenes with the Ragnars and the Space Racer, and it all leads into finally revealing Thrag. This episode was incredible, mostly because of everything I didn't talk about here, but everything I talked about throughout the entirety of this video. One of the show's best, instantly putting any reservations I had during episode 1 to bed. 10 out of 10. Episode 3 is also honestly not great, but it is still good. Machine Head is always a delight, but if I'm being honest, Titan's story has always been some of the least interesting parts of the series, and this episode is no different. I like how they touched on Mark's killing of Russ. Eve trying to figure out what's wrong with her powers was a good addition that wasn't in the comics that leads into her learning she's pregnant. Debbie and Pole's side storyline is an interesting addition as well, considering who's now coming back to Earth. The Flaxen invasion did feel like something we've seen multiple times before. I was excited for it because I know what it leads into, some damn good storytelling, but without that knowledge and just watching this episode in a vacuum, yeah, it isn't very exciting. Episode 3, like episode 1, does a good job of setting things up for the future, but as an episode itself, it isn't too exciting. Episode 3 also gets a 7 out of 10, which means the average score of the season right now is an 8, which feels just about right. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching.